apologetics. Now, again, I'm going to read and help you to explain a few things here. Let's look at the culture definitions, the idea of culture. Some of these lessons are taken from one of my professors, and so look at this culture. The idea of culture has historically proven a notoriously elusive one. Essentially, there are two basic approaches to the concept. We are talking about the culture. One is empirical and or inductive. The other is presuppositional. We will talk about what is this. The decision of which definition to pursue is critical, and it is to any model of apologetics. Let's look at the first one, empirical view of culture or inductive view of culture. This is essentially evolutionary view. It regards culture either broadly as sum total of human development. Culture is human civilization, or narrowly as the developments of a segment of humanity. Some people would say, like American culture, African culture, Asian culture, whatever the culture that you have, you can come up with. All right. So remember, empirical view of culture is that culture is sum total human development. And therefore, religion in this model is part of the culture, emerging as the collective atoms of humanity. So what is religion? It is a collective atoms of humanity. To navigate the gap between natural and supernatural from below, right? So, what is the religion? It is something that people did to fill the gap between the natural realm and the supernatural. So, how do we connect to the supernatural? So, the collective approach, right? Collective attempts of humanity is the religion. And therefore, for them, church is part of the culture and symbiotically tied to it, right? It is connected to the culture. Church is part of the culture. Not only the church, every religion is part of the culture, right? Like our country, maybe in India, we have a religion that is part of our culture, that is maybe predominantly is Hinduism. So that is the empirical view of culture. And of course, the basic idea here is shared assumptions, right? Whether it is secular or sacred, the so-called secular or sacred. These assumptions exist between believers and unbelievers on a very broad scale. And the basis of this sharing of assumption is strictly neutral in nature. That is, the fact that a given culture does things a certain way has nothing to do with the religious pre-commitments, but because of a series of random circumstances, natural resources, historical events, etc., experienced in isolation from other cultures, combined with behavior's response to them. So the point here is this: the religion basically is the shared assumptions exist between believers and unbelievers on a very broad scale, right? So what is that? That means in the fact that a given culture does things a certain way has nothing to do with any religious pre-commitments. There is nothing dogmatic about what you believe. Nothing. See, because this, what you believe is part of your culture. So if you believe is part of your culture, culture is changing all the time, right? That means it is not necessary that you should believe same thing all the time. Not necessary. Right? It can undergo changes. Maybe the things that you believed 50 years ago, not necessary to be the same because there is no pre-commitments involved. There is no religious pre-commitments. It can be changes. It is a series of random circumstances that determine your belief. And therefore it changes. So this is what the empirical view of culture. For them, church is part of culture. It's not only church, whatever may be the religion it is part of that culture. So you go to Middle East, Islam will be the part of Middle Eastern culture, and go to Western, maybe church is part of the culture, but now things have completely changed quite a bit in the Western world, but at least that's what the general understanding. So this is empirical. The second view of culture is presuppositional view. Presuppositional view of culture regards cultus, right? Cultus and the culture together. Okay, so cultus and culture together as a various shared expression of man's worldview or religion in the sacred and secular realms, respectively. All right. Cultus. Cultus is, what is cultus means? The way of worship. Right? Way of worship. Actually, the word cult always doesn't have a negative connotation. Sometimes we might think like, oh, that is cult. Cult means what? A wrong, or maybe it is wrong doctrine, not wrong doctrine, it is a heresy. So we call it cult. Not all the time. Cult has another way, it's a way of worship. So presuppositional view of culture regards cultus and culture together as various shared expressions of man's worldview. Right? For example, in the terminology of the reformers, this represents man's ora et labora. Right? What is that? Religion in this model precedes culture. Look at the difference here. Religion precedes culture and cultus and dictates their expression. As such, church in some sense distinct from the broader sociological culture in which it subsists, in that Revelation speaks to all that it does in the sacred and secular realms. So what is the presuppositional understanding here? What is presuppositional understanding of the culture? The presuppositional understanding of the culture looks at cultures, the way of worship and culture, as various expression of man's worldview or man's religion, right? And they say church clearly not part of the culture, different or distinct from the broader culture, right? Yes, church is within the culture, no doubt. Church is not some foreign place. Church is not in the moon. Church is there in the culture, but it's not part of the culture, right? Rather, it is in the culture, in that Revelation speak to all that it does in a sacred and secular realm. So the idea is that the church is in the culture to speak to the culture. Speaks to the culture. It's not part of the culture. It is in the culture to speaks to the culture. This is not to say that all cultic and cultural expressions flow directly from man's worldview, right? How you think about the reality. Culture rests not only upon self-conscious presuppositions, but also upon borrowed capital sometimes, or loose pre-understanding and traditions, factors that are in fact religious, but whose religious base is neither inconsistent, untested, or forgotten. What is that? That means that we are not saying the way that people worship in a place always automatically come from their worldview. There are times in every culture people do what? They borrow from other culture. They borrow others' understanding or others' culture into them and make it their own. So that means a culture is fluid. It just changes all the time. But what we are presuppositional understanding of culture says, church is not part of the culture, but church is in the culture to speak to the culture. Now, there is if you have studied in the Bible colleges, then this topic comes. Christ and culture. It comes all the time. They always talk about this, right? When I had the opportunity to teach on, still I do on Thursday. Every Thursday I teach in North Delhi. There is a group of people who come to learn Bible, and there is someone from northeast of Manipur. Was there for some time because he was a student in a Bible college. He did his Bachelor of Theology and Master of Divinity and things like that. He's got master degree in the Bible, and now he was part of it. That he came there for a few classes, and then there was a question asked about women pastors. Women pastors. So he comes from the background that women can be pastors, and the question came. He was trying to say so he came up with the idea of Christ and culture because he learned that one in his Bible colleges studies, and so there are things that you need to bring. Part of your culture has to come to your church. So he was saying that feminine leadership is part of our culture. We wanted to have this because we look at we are living in a world of equality. So we need to change the old practices and bring new practices in the church. So that is the point that he was trying to advocate. So let's look at then the intersection of Christ and culture. We will look at a few options here. The fact that the church exists in the world and must share the same physical and metaphysical realities as the world leads to a discussion critical to apologetic tasks, contextualization, common ground, and other shared resources, physical and metaphysical. Right? So yes, this is a fact. We exist in a culture. So we are here to share certain realities, right? We share certain realities. So how should we share those realities? The following represent 5 models of sharing supplied by H. Richard Neighbor in his 1951 book, Christ and Culture, right? So we are going to look at his 5 models of sharing. How we share, how do we share the culture in our church, right? How we bring the culture into our church, and how are we going to find common ground, or what are the things we need to do? He came up with 5 models. The first one, he said, of course, there are other people also promotes this. He says, Christ against the culture. This is the first expression or a first model that people usually use. Culture is irreparably corrupt and therefore to be avoided, even opposed by the church. Culture has to be opposed. Church's responsibility is to create a counter culture. That is the responsibility of the church. A new separated community within culture. That, like, for example, you might see people talk about, if you know about Amish groups, they were a group of German, Dutch-speaking people who migrated to the US. And what they do, they always go into a remote place and live and make their own community. Usually, other people will never be part of their community, right? It is only Amish people. And also, there are some other fundamentalist group of people who might think we need to have a separated community, right? A separated community. So build a different community. Why a different community? So that we can be comfortable to practice what we believe without any opposition, right? So that is what building a Christian community is what. So because Christ is against any culture out there. So that is the first model that people usually use. Second view is Christ and culture in paradox. What is that? Culture is irreparably corrupt. That's right. But inescapable. So we are in a paradox. So what we do? The paradox must be endured by the church, right? So this was traditional Lutheranism and other neo-Orthodox, they all talk same. We are in a paradox. We have to endure, right? Endure the culture. That means you are not to speak against it. When the culture invade your church, what do? You endure it. You're not going to oppose it. We are in a dilemma. We cannot oppose it, but what we can do is to endure the culture. Whatever people, let's endure, right? Whatever the people want to demand, let's have it, because we are in a dilemma. So this is what Christ and culture in a paradox. Third is Christ above culture. Christ above culture. Culture is basically corrupt, but can be alternatively subjugated and cultivated so that Christ's higher ethic is eventually recognized and grudgingly accepted by the culture at large. Not fully, but will accept, right? And so this is what happened. Christ above the culture. Yes, culture is corrupt, but we can subjugate the culture by Christ's teaching and bring that rule right here, which was the teachings of Roman Catholicism and some expressions of magisterial reformation. And what happened? Therefore, they had church ruled states, right? Roman Catholicism believed that church and state cannot be separated. Church has the influence over the government, right? So there are, if you look at, there are Presbyterian churches in the Europe and many other places, Roman Catholicism and Lutheranism, and they all have this idea that church and state is to go to hand in hand. Church should influence the government so that, the government should be under the influence of the church. So these people have got state churches. You see, state church. So that is what Christ above culture. So we looked at number 1, Christ against the culture. Second, Christ and culture in paradox. Number 3, Christ above culture. Number 4, Christ transforming culture. All right. This is, culture is seriously damaged, right? Seriously damaged. But salvageable. You can redeem the culture. And finally, thus capable of total redemption. Right? So the reformed post-millennialism basically has that understanding that the world will be in a progress mode for reformed post-millennialism. That automatically gospel will influence people and slowly culture will change. Christ will change culture. And Christ's kingdom, that spiritual kingdom, will be fully established in this culture. And then Christ will come. That is the idea. Christ transforming culture. Right? So finally, the kingdom is established and realized. Kingdom is realized by gospel. Gospel changes not only individual, gospel changes societies. As gospel changes societies, finally the kingdom is realized, in a full extent. So this is what reformed post-millennialism teaches. Fifth view is Christ of culture, right? Culture is good. Maybe this is the drastic opposite. Culture is good. Or at least culture is neutral and actually governs the religious expression of the church. The culture, what we have, is the expression of the church. And many modern evangelicals all think that culture is good. Now, let's look at the analysis on that. We have few things to discuss here. Since Niebuhr's definition of culture is evolutionary in nature, his analysis of intersection of Christ and culture provides no fully satisfactory model for presupposers. If you look at this 5 models, none of them provide fully satisfactory model. None of them. Maybe probably number 2 is the most resonant with the presuppositional model. Right? What is that? Christ and culture in paradox. But the problem with that one, it is tainted by neo-orthodox association. Number 1 and 5 might be alternatively invoked to answer specific expression within pagan culture, right? Like maybe if the culture is completely pagan, maybe we can say Christ against the culture. If a culture is pagan completely, Christ is against this culture. If a culture is Christian, then we can go for the fifth one. But neither can sustain a wholesale adoption. It is probably best to see church interaction with the culture as integrally tied to the apologetic task, right? Interaction with the culture is tied to the apologetic task. First, it must discredit culture as illegitimate for being internally inconsistent and for borrowing illicit pieces of Christian worldview without adopting whole. So we have to, we have to discredit culture as illegitimate for being internally inconsistent. That may not be the way to look at it. It must set forth Christian worldview. If a culture has to be accepted, it must set forth Christian worldview as the only proper context of establishing a self-consistent cultural expression. So if you wanted to adopt a culture, if we wanted to adopt, then it must be based upon Christian worldview, right? A lens of the scripture. So let's look at the apologetic consideration here. Pagan culture and its various expressions never partake neutrality. Never partake neutrality. This is not to say that all the expression of pagan culture are evil. However, since some of its expressions reflect capital borrowed from Christian worldview, nonetheless, it seems prudent to view culture with a perpetual suspicion. By be continually asking, why do you do that? Or why do you believe that? Because, yes, pagan culture, we know that most of the cultural expressions are coming from their own religion. And so it is good to ask the question, why you do that and why you believe that. Right? That is a two question should be asked with any pagan culture. Any culture that part of this Asian continent should be asked this question. Now, the second term here is contextualization, right? This is some people are very interested to use them. Contextualization of apologist person conduct and style of presentation may sometime occur as these reside at the cultural level, right? Yes, you know, when you live within a culture, you might be influenced by your culture. Who you are, your culture might influence you a little bit, right? Yes. So contextualization of the content and defense of the apologist message, however, can never occur since these reside strictly at the worldview level. The problem with the many contextualization people here, what did they do? They changed the content of the message. You cannot change the content of the message, or defense of the message cannot be changed. That is non-negotiable. Your style of speaking is different from a Western people, the way that people in the West speak. Your style might be different. That's okay, because you are looking into a group of people who are part of a different culture. The way that they learn things different from someone from a different cultural background learned. Yes, but the message cannot be changed. The defense of this message also cannot be changed. Right? Gospel cannot be changed. Gospel never changes in any culture, because that was the problem that I had with some people as I talked and even taught some of the lessons about because here in the northern part of India, we have, some people come from Western countries, and maybe they are missionaries, I don't know. And they come here and they do puja, they wanted to share the gospel, they do puja, like other people do. I definitely have a problem. Yeah, I mean, you're trying to reach out to people, it is more appealing, but your message has got a lot of issue. The way that you defend your gospel, you may be speaking gospel, but the way that you defend the gospel has a problem. If you adopt to a cultural thing, it is not only cultural thing, it is actually a religious thing. You bring a foreign religious practice or an unbiblical religious practice into your method to talk about the gospel. I think it is severely damaging. Those people have accomplished nothing by doing that. So I say contextualization of the apologist person and conduct and style of person may sometime occur, but not the content and defect cannot be changed. Third, we cannot assume that specific instances of cultural contextualization are acceptable, even if direct biblical evidence to the contrary cannot be mustered. Since pagan culture is in large part a product of pagan worldview. As I said, church are not part of the culture, I said. I would say neither a temple part of the culture. If church is not part of the culture, a temple also is not part of the culture. But like in certain place, the practices of pagan worldview is dictated and it has become the part of culture, right? So what I say here is pagan culture is in large part a product of pagan worldview. Likelihood that the specific expressions derived from unbiblical presuppositions is high. As such, it would seem prudent for the apologist to prefer a regulative to a normative approach to contextualization and evangelism, and also to worship styles through this, even though that is another topic. So when you choose a worship style, you may have to consider how much you can adopt a culture or a cultural practice. You have to think so much. Point number 4 here, a goal of contextualization can never be to make the gospel more agreeable to the pagan mind. See, this is what the wrong thing many missionaries have done, especially coming to a continent like where we are. They, because of liberalism and contextualization, what they did, they want gospel to be more palatable, more agreeable. So remember, so this contextualization is much taught in liberal colleges and seminaries. And what happened? Some of the churches in South India, Kerala or Tamil Nadu, remember CSI, CNI churches, or Marthamite churches, especially CSI churches. Remember, you talk about Lord's table, right? Lord's table. And instead of Lord's table, this priest, what do? They break coconut, right? And they do this, the arati, they can lit the candles and do like this, and all kind of actions are done, right? All this, that's what they do. Why? Because they learned from their school contextualization. What is contextualization? Appealing to the mind of the pagan culture. Let's do just like that. Let us change everything. So this has happened to Roman Catholicism and all other people, and you see adopting the pagan practices into the church. So I say here, goal of contextualization can never be to make gospel more agreeable to the pagan mind. This is true not only hamartiologically, because all our depraved people will never agree, but also philosophically and presuppositionally. Gospel is not something that people suddenly agree unless there is a miraculous work. So this is contra Hasselgrave, who defines contextualization as the attempt. Look at the contextualization he's talking about as the attempt to communicate the message of the person, works, word, and the will of God in a way that is faithful to God's revelation, especially as it's put forth in the teachings of the Holy Scripture, that is meaningful to respondents in their respective culture and existential context. So Hasselgrave is the one who came up with contextualization. And so the idea that we are talking about is maybe a little against what he is trying to communicate, right? Teachings of scripture that is meaningful to the respondents in their respective culture and their context. Whatever you do should be meaningful to them. Meaningful to them. Now, I say, while there is a sense in which various expressions of contextualization contribute to the apologist winning some converge. Yes, various expressions can contribute. They should not be thought as much as positive bridges to gospel acceptance, but as attempts in issues clearly under the purview of the borrowed Christian capital to remove of barriers of hostility and misunderstanding that mark the apologetic landscape. Right? So what are we saying? Yes, there is a sense in which, the way that we talk to people about the gospel, the way that we share the gospel to people can be different. I get it, right? We accept it. We don't share the, people in a Western mind or a Western part of the world shares the gospel is completely different, should be different, the way that we share, because maybe there are times when we share the gospel, people may not really understand if we share like a Western people share the gospel. I understand that, but okay. But what I'm saying here is this: yes, we need to be careful when we share the gospel that we don't change the content and the defense of the gospel. You can share the gospel through songs if that is what your ability, that's what people understand. Because I heard a missionary going to the Northeast India, right? To the tribals. And as he went, even most of them, they are, headhunters. And one of the things that every day the tribals do, they come evening, they sing songs, they take this wine, the rice wine or whatever, and they sing, songs, and they enjoy. That's what they do. So what the missionary did, he also went there. He observed what they do. He joined with them, and he started to teach them gospel through songs, Christian songs, and started to teach them. They were learning because the only way they can learn was through songs. So yes, maybe the way that you share the gospel is through stories, right? Because that maybe your hearers are much interested to hear stories. So can you? Yes, maybe drama is maybe very predominant in place. Can we use? Yeah, I think we can use. But what I'm saying is, yes, in a culture, what is the predominant method of communication? The acceptable method of communication, we can use it, no problem. But we are not here to change the message, or we are not here to change the defense of the gospel, the way that how we defend the gospel, because gospel is not simply a cultural things to simply to change. It is the revelation of God on how a person can be saved. So that is very important that we share it clearly. For example, here, human language is borrowed from Christian worldview. So, yes, language and culture are like, two sides of a coin. So, adopting a target audience language is clearly acceptable in contextualization. That you go to a place, you should be speaking like them, right? That's better. You come to North India, you better speak Hindi. You go to a place, you better speak their language, right? Speaking the gospel in their own way. And I would say by adopting target audience music styles may or may not be so clear an issue, right? May or may not be. The reformers were especially careful to guard distinctively cut cultic expression as particularly vulnerable to abuse here. So, a music style of a certain culture, maybe if it is okay to communicate, there is nothing wrong to adopt. Nothing wrong to adopt, provided that if you are able to communicate clearly. Communicate clearly. But if a music style that is in a culture that doesn't, not able to communicate the message clearly, we should raise a question. So what I'm saying here is contextualization, culture. Yes, we are in a culture. We are not here to run away from the culture, or we are not here to become one with the culture. We are not to run away from the culture. We are not here to become one with the culture. We are here in the culture to speak to the culture. Let me say again, we are not here to run away from the culture, or we are not here to be one with the culture. We are here to speak to the culture, right? That is the right understanding, the level that we should say. And provided that you wanted to use, I mean, if you wanted to use certain method of communication that is best suitable to that culture, that's okay. A style of worship that people can easily do, right? That's okay. Like maybe someone listening for an hour of sermon may not be acceptable for in all the culture, right? Listening 1 hour sermon may not be acceptable. Maybe some culture are not tuned to listen to talk like that, but maybe many tribal areas. So maybe you may have to change it, but still you don't change the message. You don't bring practices that are against the scripture to your church because your culture demands it. What do you do then? You become one with the culture when you bring the cultural dictates to the church. Yeah, maybe the entire world now says feminism is the way to go. So let's have female bishops, female pastors. What is wrong? We're all one. We are not here to be one with the culture. We are here to speak to the culture, the gospel. and defend the message of salvation in any given culture. So that's what we are here too. So, friends, I want us to really know what we are doing. So let me say again, you are not here to run away from a culture. Whatever may be the places where you are placed into, right? Or maybe your neighbors and neighborhoods. You're not to run away. Usually we don't run. Unless there is a huge persecution comes, people might go, right? But otherwise, as long as you're able to stay in a place, you stay. You're there in a culture, but not to be one with the culture. Culture says this, I will do this. That means if people cannot identify you as different, then you have become one with the culture. Everything that you do is exactly just like the culture, right? Your faith, your belief. I mean, for example, you do whatever other people do. You become one with the culture. Yeah. And Diwali came, and everybody wants to, bring these firecrackers and burn and do all kinds of things. And we were talking, okay, should we do it? Why don't we do it? That's nothing wrong. I mean, there may not be anything wrong. Maybe fire, just burning all these firecrackers, because within firecrackers, what is there? But we always try to communicate something. Maybe some people want to ask the question, why you don't do that? Why you don't do that? Right? And that question should be asked. People should ask, what do you believe? People should ask, why do you believe that? Right? And you should be able to ask, what do you believe? Why do you believe it? Friends, so I say this one. We are placed in a culture not to become one with the culture, but to speak to the culture that we are placed in, right? So that is the main point in the discussion of Christ and culture.